Okay, we are live. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, or this evening, I should say, for our third talk of the month, I think already. Wow. No, it's December now. I can't believe it's December. Okay. First one of December. I'm just going to do a quick intro, talk a little bit about FEDSA and who we are and what we've been doing over the years, and then I'll introduce our speakers for this evening and their topic, and we'll get going from there. Yeah, so FEDSA is Front-End Engineering and Design South Africa. If this is your first time here, FEDSA was founded 12 years ago as purely a front-end development organization. We have subsequently formed a nonprofit, and then we amalgamated with Liesel, with ZAPS, which was the South African Product Design meetup group, and we've come under one umbrella where we host a number of things related to design and development. And from that, we do beginner support via our Discord. We do a mental health and tech podcast. We do our product design talks and workshops, which is what you are attending now. But also we do front-end engineering. And I guess today we have a little bit of a crossover between the two. So that's very nice. Yeah. We have a Discord that everyone is welcome to join. Where we have discussion topics. It's quite lively in there. All sorts of topics are discussed. So I'll pop a link in the chat for everyone, and I just urge you to join that if you're interested. And we also post all our events and also interesting things that are happening in the design and tech community in South Africa. Okay, so we have two regular sponsors who allow us to, bring these things to you, keep the lights on, pay for the streaming platform and the email addresses and so on. And that's IO, which is a product and startup builder, design and development company in Cape Town, and NML, which is a specialist financial services software development company. Disclaimer, I'm head of design at NML. We're always open to sponsorship. We are a non-profit, so any money that is spent on sponsoring us is, you're able to claim that all back from tax and so on. So if there are any potential sponsors out there, you can get hold of Yusha, who's our admin person at fedsa.org, or you can get in touch with us via any of our platforms, Discord or Meetup. Okay. Just a quick notification that we've got an upcoming talk on the 12th of this month, topic to be confirmed. The meetup is in draft form. It will go live within the next couple of days, so look out for that. And then Scott Fenter and I will be doing our bi-weekly What's New in CSS lunchtime talk also in the next 2 weeks or so. So we'll also publicize those on our Discord. If you haven't joined that, it's just a casual conversation where Scott and I get together and talk about interesting things we've discovered in the last month around CSS. Okay, that's enough from me. Let's move on to tonight's topic. And we're very, very grateful to have Lara and Dee here with us tonight, who volunteered to talk to us about this very interesting project they've been working on called Tiny Letters for Mothers, and visualizing early motherhood with React and D3.js. I'm very interested to see how you've used D3, something I personally, again, to be very frank about, I gave up trying to figure out. So.
It's not very extensive.
I'll just quickly, our speakers, as I said, is Lara. I'll leave Lara to introduce herself and talk more about who she is and what she does. And the same thing for Dee. We'll pop their LinkedIn bios and everything in the chat. And I'm also going to post some additional links in the chat for everyone so you can follow along on the project. In terms of questions, we'll share questions on the screen. So if you're on either YouTube or LinkedIn, you can just post those in the chat on those platforms. They will appear to us in the studio, and we'll add them to the screen as we go along. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Lara and Dee. Thank you.
Okay. So Hi everyone. The way the way we decided to structure this is that Dee will actually introduce the project and the concept behind that and how we came to collaborate, and I'll deal with the more technical side of things, including the design and the coding, which I'll share via an Adobe XD link and also via my GitHub. And Justin will share the links for you as well. And yeah, Dee will give an intro. I think you have to leave early, right, Dee? So
I might have to, but I should also be okay. So let's see how we go. And how
okay,
we manage time. But yeah, if that's
sure, yeah. So just to introduce myself before Dee starts chatting, so I am. I'm not quite sure how to refer to myself in terms of the tech landscape. I sort of vacillate between things. I only very recently learned how to code. Last year, I did a coding boot camp, so I sometimes refer to myself as a creative developer because I come from a creative background. Basically, worked in the creative industry sector for most of my career, mainly in visual arts and mainly for commercial galleries. But during COVID, I decided to explore coding through working on certain online platforms and having certain frustrations with my own limitations when it came to the technical side of things. And I run a nonprofit organization called Inca with Landi Madiko and Tabaseng Mokoena. And Dee will talk a little bit more about this now, but Inca is basically how Dee and I came to meet and how this project was realized. So I'll pass the mic over to Dee to introduce the project, and then when she's ready, I'll move on to the technical side.
cool. Hi everyone. Yeah, it's a really very different kind of platform, certainly for me. But it's lovely to be part of a different space in a way, and to be part of this discourse and landscape. And a lot of that's thanks to Lara. So this really is a constantly evolving union between us. One that has pretty much from the get-go been pretty organic. And so Lara and I met, as she said, because of Inca. And it was around last year, this time, perhaps a little bit earlier in the year, like earlier in November, that they ran a program which has actually been funded for a second round, which Lara can speak to a little bit more. But it was called Art After Baby. And at the time, they, alongside funding two artists who had some relationship to motherhood or caregiving. It's quite complex the way they kind of landed on Art After Baby as a title. But from what I understand from Lara, it was so that it could be as broad as possible to not exclude anyone who has had some kind of relationship with mothering or caregiving or something to that effect. And so at the time, I was invited to do a little workshop with those two artists who were part of Art After Baby, part of that program. And in that little workshop presentation, I spoke a bit about something that I was working on called House of Complaints, which I see Lara's just put a link to that. And it was kind of the start of a journey, I guess, for Lara and I. And as I say, one that has evolved with great ease. And I think for us, many learnings along the way. So Lara's currently showing you some of the images from the Art After Baby project, where after the workshop, we thought, in fact, Lara just asked, would you like to set up House of Complaints? And there was this extra space in the exhibition area. It just wasn't being used. And I said, yeah, sure, great. And it was uncanny how perfect it was to kind of hang these complaints that I'd been collecting over a period of about a year, 2 years at that point. And the idea was that women or mothers or caregivers, not excluding men at all, so parents across the board, although often, I don't know if you can see from those images, in fact, only women have to date laid a complaint. They'd come, they'd write down their complaint, and then they'd have a photograph taken, and they'd become part of this wall and a series of walls in order to kind of build a house of complaints. And then in our subsequent conversations, we spoke about how wonderful it would be to begin. We were both kind of had this urgent question around how do we share the information, the stuff about especially early motherhood or early parenting. How do we share that information? Because it's a time that feels so incredibly insular and alone. And at the beginning of 2023, I'd had a baby, and it was quite an unexpected labor and early postpartum period. And in fact, the entire first year was totally not what I thought it would be. And very early on in my baby's life, I started writing a little blog which I called Tiny Letters. It was on a platform called Tiny Letters. And that platform actually, I don't know how you say that, but it kind of stopped working, and I had to migrate all of it to a Substack. So that's what you're looking at now. But it started from quite early on in her life, because I was so afraid that I would forget the complexities and the intricacies and the very mundane stuff of being in life every day with a new baby. And I was also afraid that I would kind of lose myself and not know, kind of not recognize myself. So I weirdly posed a challenge to myself, which was to in the Muslim religion, to observe 40 days is kind of a standard practice for women after they've given birth. And it's a time to, from what I understand from Muslim friends, that it's a time to kind of connect with the baby, but it's also a time for rest and a time for kind of landing, earthside on the other side of having birthed a child. And so I wasn't able to articulate that much, but I was able to kind of write down what now, when I look back at some of those posts, they feel and look very much like stream of consciousness posts, like diary entries. But at the time, what the posts do is they elicit a feeling inside me, and which I've now heard from other women who have read some of the posts, that it elicits a similar feeling for them. Most of all, it's a feeling of recognition, where they go, oh wow, you counted the days to ensure that you were kind of making it out day by day by day. You were, so there's a kind of recognition of the feelings, of the loneliness, of the difficulty really of that time. And so when Lara and I spoke a bit more, what we realized that with Tiny Letters, I had this repository of not only my own memories and my own kind of documentation of my time, my postpartum time with this third baby, but it could be a really interesting point of connection for others. And like some days, like you'll see where Lara, it was now day 8, it just says too tired to write today. And like even that was important for me, that I showed up and somehow documented it. And it was also really important to me that it was documented in a digital on a digital platform, and not by hand, not in a diary just for a diary's sake, because so many of those objects, books, where you've put thoughts and ideas, just get placed onto a bookshelf and they disappear. Whereas we have so much more awareness, we spend so much more time with our digital stuff, our digital objects. And so she observed that, oh, well, all of this is here. And Lara can explain a bit more about this pay it forward. Like you can articulate it a bit better than I can, but at the time, we were kind of discussing how through Inca, because one of the conditions, I guess, of the grant, am I right, Lara? Or kind of a part condition?
Yeah, so it's called it's like a clause within our contract with the NAC called pay forward, and basically you have to like give of yourself voluntarily. You as the organization received a grant, and now you have to. They're very loose about what you actually have to do. So I think because I had just done this coding course, I thought it would be a nice opportunity to build something for one of the artists that we worked with. And in fact, I offered the other artists as well. And now I'm going to be working on a website for one of the other artists. But Dee she said, yes, let's do it. So I think, yeah, I mean, you can talk about it, but I think our first discussion was, well, my recommendation was to potentially create a digital platform for House of Complaints. But Dee can explain why that didn't happen and why we went in this different direction.
And then Lara actually introduced me to the idea of data visualization. And what I found so powerful about it, or what I find so powerful about it, is that as a researcher, there's also always this question of, well, how can you prove what you're saying, right? And so even though as a humanities scholar, and I mean, I can kind of motivate and justify why I use mainly qualitative methods. What's really interesting about including data in this way is that it becomes quite it makes the data accessible in a way that I feel other readings of data may not be. It might be a kind of an exclusionary practice. And I think Lara and I also had this quite big, we have this overlap in trying to think about how we make the data beautiful. I don't think we've like gotten so much into that part of it yet, but it's like we're both quite invested in that idea. Like, how do we not only present the data for data's sake? So so the idea in the end was to use tiny letters as a kind of springboard to create something that invited other mothers or other people who had given birth to contribute their birth story and to contribute information and data about what it was like in those first 40 days / 6 weeks of the baby's life. And and Lara will obviously get into the more complicated coding part of it now, but this is some of what the site looks like now. And there are various ways to kind of filter what you might be looking for specifically, but also if you just hover over these little circles, which I can do for hours, even that's quite fascinating, because you can then click on, from gynae or midwife, you can click on that and then you can read someone's full story. And what is important I think for both of us is the kind of recognition that might come, seeing that someone on the other side of the world really is having a similar experience to you, and that you don't have to feel so completely alone in this particularly hard time. So yeah, I'll hand over to you. I may have missed a couple of things, but
okay, no problem.
Sorry, I do have one more thing to say. Sorry. Sorry, Lara, can I
yeah, sure.
Okay, so just to say, not only was it about the recognition of what is a hard time, the other thing that was quite unique to this experience, which I didn't have with the other babies, was that I experienced or realized that I was experiencing postpartum depression for the first time. And I think it then brought on a whole series of other questions around how we look at mothers in society in that early postpartum period, how much we impose a sense of joy and happiness, and how we actually don't think that much, or we're not very sensitive to their mental state at all, actually. Even when we think we're being kind or nice or gentle, it is often laced in the language of happiness, because of the baby. And so it really brought about a whole slew of other kind of research questions for me around what does it mean to be well or unwell in the society in which we live, and what does it mean to recognize another person, another woman who has or is going through similar things, and how do we build these kind of spaces of collaboration and care in more interesting ways. So yeah, just to say that the issue of mental health also comes up very strongly through this project, in a space where there is some talk about postpartum mental health, but like the stats are, I mean, they're quite shocking, actually. It's like 1 in 10 or something, even less, women who do experience a bout of postpartum depression for maybe the first 3 months of the baby's life, and then that decreases as the child gets older and as you come further away from, as you exit that kind of initial postpartum phase. And then also just veering into the more complex realm of something like postpartum psychosis, which most people in society don't even talk about or think about or know is real. So the project itself, I think, is so much bigger than even we realize, even though we kind of pour our energy and a lot of love into it. I think, we're kind of learning as we go, but it's been quite an interesting and enlightening project so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. So I think Dee really covered very much the conceptual side of things. I might dip into that as I'm talking, because it's something that I feel really strongly about. But I guess because it was, I was also thinking about, when it came to, I guess when it comes to product design, this isn't a typical project because we didn't have a budget. I guess it's important to kind of mention that up front, is that it was a voluntary project to start off with. I wanted, as part of this pay it forward clause, I wanted to do something that I was excited to do, that I would be passionate about doing. Dee and I would just talk a lot. We both come from very different backgrounds and places, but we just, like I said, we just seemed to find common ground when it came to certain feelings of motherhood, and especially research into early motherhood. So starting off, when I guess thinking about the design, it was something I think a lot about when it comes to artists, because I guess hosting a website is expensive, and this is a very practical thing. But I'd been thinking about, how do I do something for someone who might not be able to necessarily maintain it, or might go through phases where hosting both a domain and a website on an ongoing basis is something that's not possible. So in our case, this became a collaboration, and I didn't ever want it to become a drain on either of us. I wanted it to be a completely non-commercial project and something that we could sustain, because I'd worked with website builders before, and I'd realized, okay, well, this is an investment. It's something that you have to kind of keep going. So I think that, and this is something that we've spoken about before, I think the fact that I did this coding course, even though I felt a lot of, with regards to mental health in tech, I can see why you guys cover that, because I felt a lot of terrible insecurities. Being someone who had come from another industry, especially a creative one, who had never really done anything. I'd done a lot of design work in my experience working for galleries, and was very proficient in Adobe and that sort of thing, but I'd never done anything this technical. And I thought that I had a good understanding of computer science for just an average person, but I realized that I didn't at all. So there were a lot of insecurities there, but yeah, Dee and I spoke about the other day that doing something like this wouldn't be possible if I hadn't custom coded it. So yeah, so that was it was necessary to be able to custom code it, and I learned a lot in the process. And I think that is that's quite a difficult thing when you're sort of starting out, because you don't really necessarily have a mentor. Especially if you're freelancing. I did very briefly work for a tech company for about a month, and it was hugely helpful to like work beside a real person. But I realized that because I come from like such a creative background, that I needed to be doing something that was heavily creative. So I left and I decided I'll do this instead, and whatever I need to, I'll teach myself. Which is a really, really hard process. But I think the wonderful thing about tech is just, I call it, I guess, open source, but it's not necessarily open source. I mean, we don't pay a cent for this, and we haven't paid a cent for this, because everything has been done through GitHub and using programs that are freely available. And I find that phenomenal, really, in terms of the possibilities that are out there when it comes to tech and realizing your own projects. So the only thing that I was lacking really was the skill. So the fact that it was something that I was really, really passionate about meant that that I would push myself in a different way in comparison to if I had a job. Or if I was being paid to do this. So it's something that I'm happy to say we can sustain endlessly, and it can live on the internet, and I can tweak it whenever I need to. I can add the data whenever I need to. I posted this on LinkedIn because I know that it is far from perfect, and that my knowledge of coding is really, really minimal based on what I wanted to achieve. So it was really just outreach in terms of who can help me make it better, who's willing to give up their time, which is a difficult thing. So I'm always kind of open to that, to any conversations, to anyone out there who's listening, where you can help me improve it. So I hope anyone watching this who has a far more advanced knowledge of code, which is very likely, doesn't judge the code itself, because I just did whatever was possible. I utilized whatever tools I could just to make it work. So just to show you some of the how it started off design wise, and to share some of the design elements. So this is actually a link to an Adobe XD file. This was kind of me exploring UI UX design through Adobe XD. I mean, I know a lot of people prefer to use Figma, and I feel like Adobe XD is not really being updated anymore for various reasons involving I think Adobe was trying to buy Figma at a certain point, and then it didn't work out, or I read about it briefly. Maybe someone else here can probably enlighten you guys more about that. I like Adobe XD. I think it's probably the only program that I used that I do pay for. I pay for an Adobe Creative Cloud, but because I utilize all those other programs, I felt like I should utilize this one. So I'm not so comfortable with Figma, but I am comfortable with this. But for anyone who is interested in UI, UX, or in hearing from someone who started off exploring it, there were little things I could do, in order to prototype the website. And it was great in that Dee and I could really, really talk through the concept a lot without me having to go through real painful motions of trying to code it from scratch. So this was really helpful, and this also helped me kind of, because Dee was the one who said, I asked her, because she was working in the as a senior lecturer in the media studies department, if she knew much about data visualization, because I had been researching it and exploring it, and that was actually one of the main drivers for me to study coding. I just happened to come across an agency in Italy called Accurate, and an information designer called Giorgia Lupi, who is she coined the term data humanism, which is this idea that looks at, opposed to like big data, it looks at little data and how data can represent the minutiae of everyday life. And, I think there is this interesting thing about data visualization, in that it can simplify things in a way. It can, I think that's why there is this obsession with it in the tech world. I mean, not so much here, but it seems internationally, because it can really drive a message home really easily. But the reason why I was really interested in Giorgia Lupi and everything she did was because she actually talks about that, like the complexity of little data, like the way in which we can use data visualization to represent the complexity of our everyday lives. And I really, really liked that and related to it. And I started to do more research into Accurate, which she founded, but she now is based in New York and works for an agency called Pentagram. And I discovered that Accurate used something called D3, and then I just became obsessed with with learning how to use this, because based on what they built and what I could see was possible with what they built. So that became a little obsession. I do not have like expertise in D3. I hardly know how to use it, but I guess I do. I treat code as, when we were studying, someone kind of described it this way in terms of code, because it's so hard to remember. I mean, especially for me in my 40s, it's so hard to remember how to code. Like you learn something and then your brain just feels like a sieve. It just kind of disappears. So I think someone described it as being think of yourself more of a librarian than an encyclopedia. Like, you don't have this encyclopedic knowledge of how code works, but you remember that you saw something at some point in your life that worked in a particular way, and you can find a reference to it. So that's how I treat code. I just sort of grab things here and there, and then I start with something small, and then I build it and build it and build it. But that's still really hard for me. So I started with Adobe XD. Here I could show Dee when we were talking about, okay, well, what would a data visualization of stories of early motherhood look like? So I said, well, let's, it's interesting because it's actually it's almost like a quantitative method based on qualitative research. So we're talking about the data of words. So the most simple one is really a word frequency bubble. So here I just designed this. I mean, I didn't realize how these things really worked. But, I just threw a bunch of bubbles, the way I thought they would look nice, and then I created in Adobe XD just to show Dee how like a potential filter would work. So this is all just prototyping. I think the thing that I started working on was the tooltip. When I started to code, I was playing around with it. There was something that I didn't manage to do in the coding, which was to kind of scroll through all the mentions. So I had to come up with another way in which you could get a glimpse of a story and scroll through a whole range of different mentions of the same word, and then sort of navigate it through the tooltip. I mean, there must be a way. I just kept on breaking the code every time I tried to do it. And also kind of mentions of like another common word within the same sentence. That just once I was coding, it just felt like overkill. But the essence of it, the idea behind the design was that you're almost looking at something from the outside in. You know, it kind of looks a bit obscure, but then once you start hovering over things, you get little glimpses into a story, and then you can navigate into the full story once you click into it. So yeah, so this was as far as I got. And then with the design, there was also something that I planned that I hadn't actually managed to do was to be able to create a gradient, because every word has like a color key. So I thought if there was a phrase that was really common, I would create a gradient with the two words. And that just, once I was coding, I was like, this is just too complicated for me. But it might be something that eventually I get to the point where I'm like, okay, I can do this. Yeah, so this was just purely design, no coding here, just prototyping through Adobe XD, and then I'll take you to the actual website again. So yeah, so I actually, it looks a little bit different. I think the thing about websites for me, where things change between design and code, and luckily I was doing both, so I just needed to consult myself really, and Dee, who was really very open, when it came to the design process. Yeah, I think the thing that I struggle with websites is the responsiveness. So as a designer, I used to design a lot of physical things like books, and as a curator, I would work on exhibitions. So there was like a stability to the things that I was like creating from a design perspective. I think responsiveness drives me crazy, and I do just way too many, for those who know coding, like media queries. And yeah, I also, I'm sure you guys know him. I follow someone named Josh Comieux. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his surname. It's French Canadian, but he is brilliant at CSS, and it was one of the references in my coding course, where he has these amazing tutorials on how to use CSS and how to kind of deal with responsiveness without actually using media queries, which is amazing. But I still struggle with that a lot, because I think I maybe get a bit lazy with CSS, and I'm just like, okay, well, this works. But then I just forget about, all of the very varied responsiveness you get. So that's the responsiveness has really been very much my struggle with D3, and how to ensure that the bubbles don't, how they respond to different size screens, and how they don't get cut off, how this works within on mobile. It doesn't work very well on mobile. Another issue that I didn't account for was just with regards to the word frequency, was just how frequent certain words would be. And obviously the amazing thing, and this is why it's a wonderful thing to work on, is that it changes with every contribution, obviously. So I'll also show you like the code of how I bring in new data. It's not the most efficient way, but it's working for me. There are probably far more slicker, more efficient ways. but essentially, I mean, I had to do what I called stop words, which were like very obvious words that just kind of took over everything. The one was baby. Baby, I think I selected yellow for the color, and it was just the whole screen was yellow because it took over everything. So there were very, very obvious words. And then there were words that were kind of maybe less obvious, that were just growing and growing, and just taking over, like home. And I thought that was really, kind of an interesting word. Also husband, looking at things of like how, the interesting part is also the filtering, to see, okay, well, what are the more common words? Like how does, how does it change based on the filters that we've collected so far? I mean, by data science standards, this is probably not enough of in terms of contributors, but it's open endlessly, and also the fact that we we've opened it up to the rest of the world. I think it's really interesting. I think that that's important as well, because some of the people who contributed, for example, there was someone from the Netherlands who was originally from South Africa and then moved to the Netherlands, and she speaks a lot about the differences, which is really, really interesting. So I think if we had kind of limited it to only South Africa, it would have been a bit strange, because people kind of move all over the world, and there's so many transitions. And I like that we offer a space for that. But yeah, and then I guess also a big design choice were colors. What colors represent what word? That was really difficult, and I think I felt like Dee and I probably needed to discuss it more, but it was too hard, because every time we got a new story, we would just get like more words and more words and more words. Initially, I was asking ChatGPT for like what color represents this word, but I actually found ChatGPT just started using the exact same colors again and again, and I had to go back, and I spent a lot of time sort of making sure that colors weren't repeated. I find some here and there where I'm like, oh, that's the exact same color, and I try to ensure that they're all different. They're also, I mean, in terms of the similar words, so things that are obviously similar, like induce and induced, I will make the same color. But words that have a similar feeling, sometimes I try to connect them. So it's really, it was quite difficult in that it was just so expansive in terms of the amount of words that were used, or that come up all the time, and having to really find different colors for everything, and that affects the visual so strongly. But what's amazing is that it's organic and it changes all the time. So, something that dominates at a certain point won't later on. And then there were other decisions. I think I'll take you guys into the coding also, just to show you. In what I mentioned is that when it came to the design, and then having to like make it work in code, this tooltip, I think, in the design was just way too complicated. And to be able to scroll through every sentence that so how this works, in case it's not obvious, is that all of these bubbles represent a word, and then every time you hover over it, you get a sentence that includes that word from the stories that we've collected, and then you can navigate to the full story through the bubble, and then you can go back. So initially you were meant to be able to scroll through every single sentence that mentions that word, and I couldn't do that. So now how it works is that when you hover over a bubble, a random sentence comes up mentioning the word, and I've managed to make sure that it's a different sentence every time. So yeah, so you can scroll and scroll and scroll, and it will come up with a different sentence. But that takes a little time for the user, I guess, to understand. It was really useful working with Dee on this, because she would just navigate it. Initially, I didn't know what to do about the tooltip. Should you click on the bubble? Should you hover over it? And D3 has this built-in animation where every time it comes up, so you can see it, like the bubbles bounce. They have this bouncy animation, and I did something where you would click on I think when you click outside of the tooltip, it disappears, and it was terrible, like the user experience. These bubbles just the tooltips just like started shaking. So it was, it was like navigating things like that. So now I've set it on a timer where if you navigate away, it sort of fades after a few seconds. And I think I've made that longer on mobile because it just worked better. The other decision was, what is the frequency limit? So I change that all the time, every time I get new submissions, because some bubbles get too big and some get too tiny. So it just affects that depending on the frequency of the word. So what it does mean, however, is that because I made the frequency, I think, more than 3 mentions, some don't come up. So there's someone who had a baby in Egypt, but the story is so short that there aren't enough mentions to be able to navigate to her story if it's just her. If we do get more contributions from Egypt, which I don't know how likely that is, it will change. Basically, so there's all of that stuff that is interesting, and that it's like I said, it's an organic thing. But it presents some challenges. And then something that changed, I guess, was, I think that initially the way I designed it was that if you hovered over a key, it would bring up a corresponding tooltip, but that really didn't work at all, or I couldn't get it to work. So I think I came up with a very different solution, where if you clicked on the word, it brought up all mentions kind of listed in this way, and I thought that was quite nice. It was like a nice resolution, and then from here it's just another way of navigating into the stories, and it's the same thing there. So just to show you, I'll switch over to GitHub quickly to show you some of the code. So I mean, just also something to note, I don't know, I use React. I don't, so I'm doing Josh Kumo's the joy of React, because I think in part of my coding course, we sort of, I mean, we built our final project in React, but I really didn't know what I was doing. But I did know that I really liked React. As much as I hated JavaScript, JavaScript was just terrifying to me. And then React just made so much more sense. And yeah, I think when I did work for a tech company briefly, I worked a bit in React more, and it got my confidence up, and I kind of felt like this is my, I mean, I know it's not officially a framework, but this is my framework. And I really, really recommend it to people who, look, I don't know anything about any other frameworks, so I can't really say. I mean, maybe there are better frameworks, but to anyone who just feels that that JavaScript is just a mess of nonsense, that that you get it to work sometimes, but you just barely understand how. I just feel that React makes it really, really, really much easier to handle. And I think primarily, perhaps for me, that's the JSX. I mean, it's modeled on HTML, which is really easy to understand. And once you start making components, I mean, it is just like phenomenal what you can do with them. You know, the fact that it doesn't matter. So yeah, so just to show you some of the code. So yeah, the fact that you can see on the website that there are, I mean, I haven't counted them, but there are many, many, many words at this point. And those pages that I showed you to navigate through to each word is essentially, it's what you call a component. So it's essentially one template that you create that really like draws all the data in through. So I guess I'll start with the data, which is like really, really basic. So here I just have this commented out. But yeah, I decided we're getting entries through a Google Doc form. There's probably a much clever way to draw the data from the Google Doc, but I was like, let me just create a really straightforward object literal that I can work from, where I know like all of the information that each mother wants to share is here, because this is hosted on GitHub. All of this is available like in the code. So there's nothing that I can hide here, you know, like an email address or a full name. So I was like, let me just put everything that's here is pretty much on the website. And yeah, essentially every time I get an entry, I add it here. I sort of follow this structure. What I do have to do is I have the full birth story. And then I have to actually break it down into individual sentences. I sometimes group sentences just so that it makes sense. Like, so when you're reading the tooltip, you can follow like what it's pretty much about. I relied, this was also something interesting. Initially I relied a lot on ChatGPT to like break it down into sentences, but then it was really weird. There was a very, very long one, and eventually ChatGPT just started making stuff up. Which I started noticing because I started to get errors in the code, which was really bizarre. So I have to watch out for that. And even if I do it through ChatGPT, I have to go through it and check that it didn't make anything up, which is really kind of freaky and strange. Yeah, so this is the data file. I'm sure, I think you guys are probably interested to see there is only one component where I use D3. So this is a very big component. I have like a whole bunch of functions here that help me either, so a lot of these functions, so they like normalize the word, so they'll like make sure it's lowercase. So it's just so that it includes like all mentions of that word, whether it's whether it starts at the beginning of the sentence and it's uppercase. So if it's uppercase, it'll make it lowercase. If it ends with an S as well. So if it's a plural, it will also include that word in the count. Things like that. Also things like so there were a lot of things that were like very niggly here, where if there was a full stop, or if there was a bracket, or if there was a dash, it wouldn't count the word. It actually would with in this component in D3, but then when I started to utilize the same function for other elements, so like the full story page, there were issues. It's just like it wasn't adding up. So this is all the D3 stuff. So what I did was I found existing code for a word bubble data visualization, and then I just built it out and built it out and built it out and built it out. Tried to work on things like responsiveness here. I still find it really, really difficult with D3. I'm not sure how you structure it. I just want to kind of structure the bubbles in a column, but they seem to be like automatically structured in like more of a sort of like a square shape. I did figure out how to create different spaces in between. But yeah, so I mean, this is the over here. You can see the that was the tooltip. This is the tooltip over there. There you can see I used in these expression slots the random result, and that's this is pretty much like the main component, and then also created components for the color keys. So this is also just one component that I reuse, but I think that what I was telling you about these components here, so the full story page, this is essentially the template for you see here the slots for for people who find this like really straightforward to understand, but like these are the slots for that are bringing in the data. So I can, so every time I add a story, I just add it, and it automatically becomes part of this other structure. Word sentence page. So this is the one I think that is probably, I mean, there's just like so many of these pages, but it's just really one component that's utilizing the same code again and again. Here I have, I'll show you, this is so color map. These are all the different color codes. So you can see there are a lot of them. There's also stop words here. So these are all the words that it doesn't include, which are, like basic articles, but there are also weird things that, that would come up. Yeah, things like numbers, but also, yeah, things that were really common, like postpartum, newborn. It's just those bubbles became so overwhelmingly big that, and remembered, labor, remember, it just overtook like the whole thing. So it is that there was like a bit of structuring that needed to happen with regards to, or some decisions that had to happen with regards to what we include, what we don't. And yeah, and I change my mind often about these, about whether they're important or not. Yeah, and I guess these are, yeah, there, I mean, there are some components. Yeah, also just just that, you know, the way that I've structured this is like sort of embarrassing. It's not, it's actually just like a bunch of components. If you want to see, I don't know if anyone's interested in this, I don't know like the level of interest, but yeah, but this is how React is structured. So you have, where is it? Here's the main, which brings in the app component, and then within the app component, it brings in the structure. And then so something quite complicated about bringing React into GitHub that is like, it took me a long time to figure out how to do that. Also how to navigate using like router. I mean, for anyone in the future, you have to use hash router with GitHub, or else it doesn't work. That's why you see in the actual, I mean, I don't know, maybe there is another way. This is what worked for me. Yeah, so you see in the actual website a lot of the, what are they called? The links have hashes in them. I think that's just how it works with GitHub. But yeah, so here I had to create a main content page also, where I routed everything. Also, I don't know if that's the correct way or not. But I guess here what you can see is the JSX. And for anyone who's familiar with HTML and maybe doesn't know React or even JavaScript, you can start to see, okay, that looks like HTML, but it's not. So essentially, that is kind of everything I wanted to talk about. I don't know if anyone actually has any questions or any comments. Yeah, I'm happy to explain more. And yeah, and Dee's back if you have any more questions that are more about the conceptual side or more about the work that Dee does. You're welcome to ask her. But yeah, that's kind of everything I wanted to say.
Oh, thanks so much, Lara and Dee. That was great. I have some things. No questions come through from the chat, but I've got a few things that just stuck out to me. First of all, yes, Josh Kumo, incredible.
Yeah, no, he's amazing. Oh my God, yeah, it just makes you want to learn more. Yeah.
Any new person who joins my team, I put them on his courses. Yeah. Georgia Lupi and her work. So I first became aware of her through a Debbie Millman podcast a while back. Design Matters. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
No.
Where she spoke about her whole conception of humanist data. Can you just talk a little bit more about her? Because I think that's very interesting, her take on your stand. I think you mentioned it a bit, like big data is impersonal and allegedly objective, and what her approach is around humanist data and how that influenced your project.
So like I said, so actually how I came across her was I was working for a company. This was before my like pre-tech journey. I was in it around like 2022, and I'd been working on like an online platform, and and yeah, and we were really, really struggling with the developer that we were working with, because I think, the expectation, it was in the art world, the gallery world, and they were expecting her to be more creative than she was. So I was just curious, and I was like, I think I went onto the awards, the WWW awards, and I came across Accurate, and it just like blew my mind. I was just, they had this site, it will take me a while to find, which was looking at like Facebook's broken promises. And I was just like, as you scrolled, there was interactivity, and it was all based on like real data. And I just thought, wow, this is something I've never seen before. I've never thought about. So I looked at the people who are involved, and I saw she was the founder. So I think I Googled her, and that took me down a whole different path, because she's not a coder. She doesn't code, but she calls herself an information designer. And I listened to her TED Talks, and they're so interesting, because I think she's done 2 now, and I actually have to listen to the second one. But the first one she spoke about is also interesting now in relation to what's happening. She said she speaks about the shock of when Donald Trump first became president, and how like the data people were looking at was in a way misleading, and how you had these 2 perceptions, that people had, that no, it's clear that Hillary's going to win. And then suddenly people are like blown away by the fact that Donald Trump is suddenly president. And she spoke about living in a small town in Italy, and being in this bubble, and not really realizing, like what is outside of it. And how, and how your perception is really like very much affected by, like this very immediate environment that you're in, and how that leads to misperception, and how that led her to kind of rethink about the simplicity of data, that it's so simple, it's so clear. Like Hillary had such a clear path based on the polls, and like these 2 numbers, and how that kind of narrowed everything. And she just realized, like that there was this whole magical, extensive world of data that was outside of our field of perception. And I think that that's like a really beautiful idea, because one of her projects that I loved is called Dear Data, and I showed you the website, and that was really like a very analog project, where her and another information designer sent postcards across the Atlantic, and they had to do like they decided, this pact with each other, to do drawn data visualizations of like their everyday life, like like how many times, I don't know how many times they say hello to someone, or what colors they wear in a week, or what color lipstick. And they visualized it in this really complex and beautiful way, in these tiny little stories, but that became part of this like bigger story of how we communicate, and what we hide and what we show. And and I think it's wonderful, like that she's a designer. Those works are now in the collection of MoMA. They've like published a book, and it was just, to me, like so interesting, because I think that's the thing. I had been living in this world that was very narrow, and I thought about creativity in this very particular way, and yet here was this person who had started a tech agency, and was an information designer, and she had started as an architect, and she was just really like a wonderful influence for me to think differently about creativity and how data is fascinating in a lot of ways. And I think she talks about small data and like kind of working against this idea that we need to simplify things. Like I think we need to in a way we need to make them more complex because we are complex. That's kind of what I remember of her theory. But
this is, I guess, for both of you. I found it interesting when you're talking about what you took out, what words you weren't going to include. I imagine that's a very difficult task. Can you talk? I mean, it's not just numbers, right? When you're looking at that, is there any kind of guidance that you went on when you were doing that, or was it just surely, okay, we can't present the data in this way because of the sheer number of times it's being said, or was it other things around that?
So Dee and I had only a few conversations because we didn't reach the point where I said to her, look, I have to show you like these more technical things, and we spoke about it. I mean, I wish I could show you like what it would look like if some of these words were in there. It would be impossible to navigate, It's the purpose. But I think I started off with what was recommended generally with word frequency bubbles. There are like a certain list of words that are generally excluded, like articles and prepositions, like a very basic that have, I guess, less meaning. But I think, if I'm honest, I think it will become trickier and trickier and trickier to because there will be these words that will just grow and grow.
The more data you gather,
but also the more we gather, and especially the more we gather from more diverse voices, it will change. A lot of them will decrease. So it will all kind of balance out, but it definitely is a decision in terms of representation, and that it's not it's not just like pure science. There is like an element of selection to it.
Yes, I know, sure. There isn't a question, but there's a comment. I'll share it on the screen. It's a long comment, so it's going to take up the whole of the screen. But it's a very nice one. Sorry, Dee, we are completely blocking you. This is such an impressive project. It's incredible to see something so beautifully crafted, especially knowing how challenging coding can be. While I'm not experienced in React or JavaScript, I can tell you this is an accomplishment. This project will be interesting to watch as it moves internationally. Hope it continues. Great job. So there's a very nice comment from someone. That's from our LinkedIn stream. Unfortunately, LinkedIn doesn't tell us who made the comment. So whoever you are, thank you very much. I think that sums up what I've thought about this as well. Challenging to take on a data visualization project from a coding standpoint. Very tricky. Oh, here's another question. How often are you updating the code as the data comes in?
So pretty much as soon as we get an entry, it actually took me a while to like set an alert on Google Forms. But now I figured out, I can actually like be alerted to when. So I used to just check every day to see if someone had filled in the form, but now like we have a shared email address, and whenever someone fills in a form, I'll actually get an alert. So so it depends how busy I am. I usually I'm excited to add it, and then once I have added it, I mean, people don't have to share their email addresses, but if they do, I send them the story and I CC and Dee, so she can also read it and see how the site has changed. And like, if I'm honest, like that, I don't feel like, unless we get like, I don't know, like, like 10 entries a day, I don't feel like there will ever be a drain on me, because it's such interesting work. Even though it takes like, it's not just adding the data. Obviously, it's like it's dividing it into sentences. It's making sure that, because sometimes, sometimes, I don't know, I guess I make mistakes, and, you know, the sentence isn't, for whatever reason, the sentence isn't there, making sure that everything matches up. And then often it's a case of adding new colors to the new words that are, so that, and then just checking for bugs. I mean, something to point out is that it's not like 100%. Like I spoke to Dee about this. There are things like, so it works for the bubbles, but then I think in the sentences, pages, sometimes it includes words within words. So like body and nobody, so it will count nobody. So there are little like quirky things like that. But with the actual bubbles, because I started off with the D3 code, it's like, it's pretty, you know, like it's pretty solid. But yeah, so there's stuff like that I'm working through. There are also things like, I mean, obviously there's the issue of it being in English, which is a limitation if someone who doesn't speak English wants to contribute, and it's open to anywhere in the world. Like that is a thing we've spoken a lot about, and yeah, like issues with that. But yeah, but I think we're kind of we have no funding. We're doing what we can with what we've got. So yeah, so hopefully, if it ever gets to that, we'll be able to do things like translation, and then it will become really complicated, because because it will have to be in one language, and how do you decide how to translate something? And but in the meantime, it's manageable, and I think we're keen for more people to contribute. That's why
stories.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close the session, Dee or Lara? No. Okay. Well, I just want to say thanks very much. Just hang on for a minute afterwards, I could just thank you properly.
Sure.
Thanks to everyone who joined us. As usual, this will be on our YouTube channel, so you can always revisit it. Please share links. This has been a great experience for me to learn about your project, and it's certainly our first foray into the more of the kind of art world and things like that, and not just pure like, hey, here's how you do something in React. So it's refreshing from my point of view. And I think we definitely want to be doing more of these kinds of talks and sharing and giving the platform to people doing really interesting work that's outside of perhaps building your same old banking app or whatever it might be. So integrating myself. So thanks so much for your time. And everyone, all the links are in the chat. Please visit, check out the project, also share it, contribute if it's something you can contribute to, and join us on our Discord to get all the latest updates on what we're up to. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.